Imagine an equation where the more you add, the less you have. And numbers that should have grown keep shrinking. Formulas that look stable bend in a ways you cannot really explain. Inputs vanish. Totals flip. Balance sheets move their own logic. And every solution only raises another question. And the strangest part, the system is not broken. Somehow, I became a part of that math. It started on a summer afternoon in a half-empty office. One by one, every senior engineer disappeared into vacation. And I was the junior. I was supposed to just learn, observe, and stay out of the way. But suddenly, there was no one left to ask. No one left to hide behind. And on my desk sat a feature that didn't really care about my job title. At first I thought, I'll figure this out. I opened the code, and it looked like the language that I should know, but didn't. I fixed one thing and break two more. Nights stretched into mornings, and my Google chat stayed quiet. Every new line of code felt like a coin toss between progress and disaster. It was not a courage that kept me going. It was something closer to stubbornness, a quiet refusal to let the whole thing collapse into my hands. And I told myself that maybe I will fail, but not by quitting. At some point, panic gave space to something else, focus. I started breaking down things into the unknown, into smaller pieces, testing everything twice, documenting every change. I forced myself into a rhythm, fix, test, fail, and then retry. Slowly, painfully, the chaos started to turn into a working plan. I didn't feel confident, but I kept moving. Piece by piece, the feature started to take shape. And after testing and final tweaks, it was solid. And then came the release. The build passed the App Store. No issues, and at first we rolled out to just a few percent of the users, a safe test. And the numbers looked good. Within a couple of days, the analytics were clear that people are using the feature, really using it. Faster than anyone expected, the rollout accelerated. And almost before everyone could process it, the feature was live to 50 million people. I've never seen this before. Dashboards lit up, adoption curves rising clean, no spikes of errors. Analysts and product managers were excited, dropping comments how well the feature was landing. And from outside, it looked like celebrating a feature that outperformed expectations. Everyone relieved and pleased, but inside, I felt emptiness. Tough work have drained every bit of energy out of me, and my thoughts were flat. Instead of pride, there was a sense of exhaustion and even hopelessness. And the strangest part was that I couldn't believe it was me. It felt like success slipped through my hands by chance, accident, maybe luck, but not more. What happened to me is not rare. In fact, it's one of the most common things in a high-performance environments. Teams push, 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 and the more they push, the more invincible the cost becomes. Until one day, someone burns out like a match. constant pressure, rising expectations, the pace that never slows down. Each delivery just resets the counter. It couldn't ever feel like a success, only like a new baseline. When the finish keeps moving further away, people lose sight of what they have actually achieved. Companies lose good people that way all the time. Trusted contributors, brilliant engineers, gone not because they failed, but because they could never feel the weight of their own impact. And I could easily be one of them. But here is the truth. In environments like this, there is always another performance review, another target, another bonus dangled in front of you. And for a while, that keeps you moving forward. But it can't keep you there forever. Numbers and bonuses do not restore you. They only keep the burnout further down the line. So the real question for me became, how do you stay? How do you keep going without breaking? And for me, the answer showed up in a very unexpected place, in the water. The first time I tried sailing. That summer, after weeks of pressure, I stepped onto a boat and not really knowing what I was doing. And the moment we pushed off, everything else stayed onto shore. To be honest, sailing isn't relaxing, it's terrifying. The boat tilts, the ropes stain in your hands, and all you can think of is how not to let it capsize. But in that intensity, something happened. The stress I had from work, the guilt, the comparison, the pressure had no space left. The sea absorbed it. Not everybody sails, of course. For some it's tennis, boxing, skiing, anything that turns your body adrenaline that stress leaves behind. For me, sailing was not only a distraction. It broke the illusion that my whole identity lives inside the job. That small shift made room for a different way of working. In high-performance environments, succeeding does not come from acceleration. It comes from balance, a steady rhythm that you can actually sustain. The lesson I brought back to work: you can't run at full speed all the time. Balance sounds simple, almost like a cliche, but the truth is that most of us don't really know what it really means, and reaching it takes far more effort and far longer than any sprint. Finding steady rhythm turned into a quiet war with myself. Some days I managed to slow down, but then I bargained myself back into overworking, and the result was a swing: too much one day and too less next. And the guilt was always there, whispering that I should be doing more. I couldn't fight that cycle head on. What really worked for me was starting smaller than I ever thought. Piece by piece, like stacking Lego pieces, I was building my routine. Waking up same time, brushing my teeth, eating breakfast, starting work at fixed hour, and after work, close laptop. Nothing glamorous, but those small routines created a structure that I could lean on. Of course, they didn't remove the pressure, but they were enough to level out the spikes, and I could work steadily for longer without breaking. The routines gave me something I haven't felt for a long time: a sense of stability. I could finally trust myself to keep going again. But it still was not enough to silence the doubts. I kept looking sideways. Everyone around me seemed moving faster, shift cleaner code, and comparing myself to others made me feel behind. And if I haven't noticed what was happening, I would turn back into the same loop again, pushing harder to prove that I wasn't worse than others. The ugly truth is that most of our doubts come from comparison, but we rarely compare ourselves fairly. Our brains trick us into measuring side by side with people into completely different situations. I caught myself comparing me to senior engineers with 2 decades of experience while I was a junior. Of course, they solved the problems faster, found bugs I couldn't see for hours and minutes, but instead of seeing the gap for what it was, the experience, I turned it into proof that I was not good enough. What finally taught me to face doubts was something that I once read about the samurai. They entered the battle as if they have already accepted death, not in defeat, but in clarity. For me, that meant preparing for the worst, accepting that others might be better than me, but still moving forward, doing what I could here and now, writing that code anyway, shipping that feature anyway, not giving up. And over time, doubts did not vanish, but they grew quieter because I kept going despite them. And maybe, just maybe, that is a real antidote to perfectionism. In nature, flawless trees, perfectly straight ones, without a mark, are the first to be cut down and turned down into lumber. But the imperfect ones, the crooked ones, are left to grow high into the forest. The strength does not come from being ideal. It comes from continuing to grow. So if the crooked trees are the ones that keep growing, then the question is, how do you make sure that entire forest can thrive that way? How do you build an environment where every tree, not just the strongest or the luckiest, has a space to grow? And that's a real challenge for teams and companies, creating cultures that don't quietly exhaust people, especially the most vulnerable people. On paper, that sounds simple, but the paradox is that there isn't one clever trick or universal formula. Protecting people from doubts, imposter syndrome, and burnout is about building an environment, a system of habits and choices that make people grow. I'm not speaking here as a manager. I'm speaking here as an engineer from inside. Company's culture doesn't live in slides and handbooks. It shows up in details. Whether people feel safe to speak, whether work gets shared fairly, or whether exhaustion doesn't become normal. So what does actually help? First is establishing trust. It doesn't announce itself in bold slogans. It shows up in how a team behaves when the stakes are actually small. When someone interrupts into a meeting, does the manager let it slide, or do they bring the quiet voice back in? This simple choice signals more than manners. It tells the team whether speaking up is safe. For a shy person, this choice decides whether he stays silent or speaks up next time. It comes from small decisions repeated again and again. But trust itself is not enough. Even the most open teams will break if the load is carried unevenly. Burnout doesn't arrive in one dramatic moment. It seeps in quietly when late working nights stop being exception and become a pattern. This is a dangerous gap absolutely no one manages forever, and someone has to notice the leak and question why the same shoulders always carry the heaviest load. And once the load is balanced, then another question appears. Does anyone actually notice the work? So you fix a bug that no one noticed. You untangle the thread that kept the release from stalling, and the room moves on as if it has happened by itself. The problem here is not an extra effort, but the erasure. Recognition doesn't mean applause or trophies. It means at least a small signal that says, thank you. This mattered, and you made it happen. Recognition tells you are seen. Its absence turns into self-criticism, while even the smallest flaw start to feel like failure. And the next step after this is obvious. You stop taking risks. The room grows quieter, and the experiments shrink, and innovation gives way to caution. That's why the right to make mistake isn't kindness, it's oxygen. Without it, team holds its breath. Don't get me wrong, right to make mistake doesn't mean carelessness. It means safety to learn. Managers can frame mistakes as data points, not verdicts. And they can ask, instead of who to blame, what did we discover? Managers can let juniors ship small features when the mistakes are actually cheap, and show that sleep is not a career-ending mark, but a natural part of the progress. At the end of the day, processes can be fixed. Workloads can be managed. Cultures can be redesigned. But none of it matters until we face the struggles that nobody sees. The quietest battles are never fought into the meeting rooms. They're happening in our own minds, in total silence. And the real challenge in building better teams is helping people see that their worth is unconditional. I know I'm not the only one. Every one of us, at some point, maybe often, has looked around and thought, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. No matter how much you've done, those thoughts come anyway. Because we are all humans, and every one of us is vulnerable. The real challenge is to keep moving despite our doubts, to find balance, to live without chasing perfection. And just as important, to build teams where it's safe to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, and where our worth isn't only measured by constant performance alone. I carry this lesson not only from work, but from family. My uncle, who's unfortunately no longer here, managed to become a very successful, self-made businessman. But he never tried to look flawless. He just kept showing up. Imperfect, but determined. And that's what made his life extraordinary. I began this talk speaking about the equations that didn't add up. But life isn't always solved in numbers. What carries us is not perfection, but persistence, balance, and the courage to keep going, guided by our inner compass that reminds us what all of this is for. So, if you take anything from this talk, let it be this: doubts do not mean that you do not belong. You're not here by mistake, and neither am I. Thank you.